They were just kids. But that day, they saw something they were never meant to see. Their father didn't notice them. He was laughing with another woman. And in that moment, everything they believed about their family cracked. Should children protect their parents' secrets? Or tell the truth even if it destroys everything? This is the story of two sisters forced to choose. There are moments in life when the second we experience seems to stretch on, and all time on earth suddenly stops. I experienced one such moment. However, because it was the most terrifying moment I've ever lived, time was actually still moving. I was simply frozen in place. My name is Grace. I'm 14 years old, and this story has forever changed my trust in my parents and, frankly, what I think love is. Perhaps that's why I'm telling you, because I've learned how dangerous silence can be, and others might need to understand that too. It was a Saturday afternoon in September. The weather was lovely, the clouds were pinkish, and the city was focused on the lazy energy of the weekend. The streets were crowded, people sat on cafe terraces, families strolled in the parks. It was like any other day, but I know that on normal days, usually nothing is normal. Normal days change lives. My sister Sophie and I went downtown from our friend's house to do some shopping. Just wander around, look at the shoe stores, maybe have a smoothie. You know, teenage stuff. Then Sophie's shoelace came undone, and she had to sit down on the middle of the pavement. I squatted down and started tying it for her. At that moment, we were just a few meters away, at the top of a staircase leading to a restaurant called Aria, with a high reception area. It was an expensive place. The light was soft. The windows beautifully framed the outside world, and inside it seemed as if there was another universe. As Sophie tied her shoe, I noticed someone exiting from beside the glass window. A man and a woman, obviously coming from a private table. The man was familiar from my father's shoulder build. He was the type who preferred dark shirts and always had a cup of tea with a collar before going to work. My father, David Harrison, a financial advisor with a drummer's heart, the heart and soul of our family. A man who inspired confidence in everyone with a solid demeanor. I knew him because perhaps I had seen him every day, but I certainly didn't know the woman who was with him. Her long blonde hair, her outfit suited for outdoor events, her smile just like my father's smile. There was a noticeable closeness in the way they walked and talked. Their hands touched for a moment, then they parted. A taxi was called by the receptionist. Sophie didn't look at me while she tied her shoe, but I felt it. She saw it too. I felt the silence, the vibration that started inside the shoe. When we finished tying her shoe and stood up, my father was no longer there, but his essence remained. It felt like a kind of vomit burning in my stomach. I feel the need to say this because everything after that was awful, and I knew it. Sophie's hand. Let's go to the library, I said. Actually, I wondered if she would. On her first day of school, Aidi promised to protect Sophie. Being the older sister meant not just protecting her from bad things, but protecting her from the bad things others did. But I never knew how to do that. I still don't know. In the quiet chairs of the library, and I tried to decide whether or not to talk to Sophie about what we had seen. She was trembling slightly. The trembling wasn't just physiological, it was something spiritual. Yes, she was worried. Grace, was that our father? She asked, her eyes fixed on the window. I could have lied. I could have said it was someone else. Maybe someone who looked like me. But to lie to Sophie would have meant denying her what we saw under the September sun. And I could never be that kind of person. Yes, I said, hearing the pain in my voice. Her eyes welled up, but she didn't cry. It felt like she was standing in my place, as if she was waiting for me to collapse. But I had to endure, because I was the older one. I had to be the leader. At that moment, I thought of my mother, Margaret Harrison, our grandmother, our guide, the woman who acted as the light in my father's eyes. Every morning, she would get up early and prepare the perfect breakfast. She would give my father food wrapped in sacks. And every night, she would wait for him at the door when he came home. I used to think their marriage was as good as most people's, but now, the scenes in the restaurant kept replaying in my mind that woman's laughter, my father touching her muscles, the proximity of their distance to inattention. This wasn't friendship. This wasn't even work colleagues. This was something, perhaps the beginning of something. We are not the owners of the house. They are our family. Their privacy is important. Sophie was only 11, so young, so close to suffering. but I didn't notice the difference. Either I was only 4 years older, and being a little older didn't make me any better, nor did it guarantee I'd be more protected. We returned home that evening. Mom was happily feeding because she hadn't produced any trash. They each had a social media guide in their hands and were laughing, glued to their screens throughout the reception area. When Mom heard our voices at the door, she turned and opened her arms, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Perhaps her hug counted as payment. "My darling, did you have a good time?" he asked, stroking my hair. "Yes, and," I said, feeling a pang of guilt for lying. The truth inside me had turned to honey, its stickiness gone. But I was just a lip. My mind was preoccupied with something else entirely. My father had gone to work. That was one of the false explanations that would later come to light, of course. But I didn't know. If I had known, perhaps I would have acted differently. Perhaps I would have stopped searching for my mother in the final room. Perhaps I would have told her immediately. At the dinner table, we acted as if everything had just happened. My mother asked about potato analysis. My father, when he got home, told stories with songs. I watched him manage the nightly routine, the clothes, the nightly rites. Sophie was quiet in the room with me. When she lay in her bed, I closed the door. I was outside and held her in my arms. "What does this mean?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know," I said, because I didn't know. But then I remembered my father was home. My mother was happy. Everything seemed as it should be. But there was a crack, an invisible but palpable crack. The next morning, when I saw my father at breakfast, he looked different. Or maybe I was seeing things differently. He put on a tie and my mother kissed him. I used to love that show. But now, knowing it was fake, it had become harmful. Throughout the week, what we saw there became a kind of secret language between Sophie and me. Eye contact, the twitching of eyebrows, silent messages. Mom didn't notice, but Dad, I think, sensed something. On Friday, after school, Sophie went to the park with me. We had no plans. We just wanted to go to a quiet place, somewhere nobody would ask about us. I sat there and saw Sophie crying. I embraced him and felt the pain within me, the weight of this knowledge, the horror of this secret. "We should tell Mom," said Sophie, but I knew it wasn't easy to say. These secrets had once protected people, but now they were poised to destroy them. As time passed, it became apparent that some questions remained unanswered. Although everything seemed normal on the surface, a sense of incompleteness emerged upon closer inspection. People may choose to suppress this feeling because the idea of disruption is frightening. A sense of familiar security is a powerful factor that delays questioning. Therefore, some signs are unconsciously ignored. As daily life goes on, a feeling of something being missing grows deep inside. Small inconsistencies become more noticeable over time. At this point, one is forced to confront their own intuition. The question arises, why weren't more questions asked in the past? Answers often take shape amidst fear, habit, and procrastination. On Sunday night, my father went to bed early. He said he'd had a long day at the office, the same lie. It was slowly becoming a habit. My mother was watching television, loud enough that it was difficult to hear from the stairs. Sophie and I pretended to be asleep in our room, put our phones on silent, and waited. By 11:30, we made sure every corner of the house was quiet. Sophie looked at me with terrified eyes. "Are you sure?" she asked. I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure about anything, but I knew we couldn't carry this secret any longer. Our stomachs ached, our heads spun on sleepless nights. I knew telling Mom was the right thing to do, but knowing is much easier than doing. "Do you remember where my father's second phone is?" I whispered. "A few weeks ago, my father told me to check the phone to get a message. So I went into his study. He saw a phone on the desk, its eyes closed. He didn't want to answer it back then. But now, that phone held the answers and perhaps the truth. Our descent down the stairs was quiet and quick. Sophie's heart was beating so fast I was afraid to hear it. The only sound from downstairs was the faint ronfles of her mother's sleep apnea. The study door was slightly ajar. The moonlight illuminated the desk completely. The phone was there. The lock was open back then. Very few people locked their phones. My father obviously thought this was a clear display of privacy. Perhaps the fact that it was unlocked was like a map to us. The screen was bright, dazzling our eyes. The Messages app opened immediately. She saw the conversation list, mostly colleagues, clear conversations. But then she saw a name, Victoria. Just Victoria. No last name. It makes me sick. Sophie leaned over my arm. We read the messages beginning lightly and elegantly, then becoming increasingly intimate. I missed you so much today. Can you call tonight? You don't know how much I love this. Then, from further exchanges, something more explicit emerged. Dates, hotels, restaurants, secret meetings, scheduled messages. All of this was supported by shared photos of Victoria in the restaurant lights, in parks under my father's arm. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a plan, a life, the perfect family we were told we had. Another life being secretly built beneath the misty clouds. Take a picture, I said to Sophie, my voice sounding off key. Sophie, with trembling hands, pulled out her phone. Every screenshot, every message documented all the evidence. In the photos, my father's smile looked different. He smiled in a way he never smiled at Anne, deeper, more genuine. This was what frightened me most, the authenticity of the display of affection. I noted the dates of the messages. The first message is from 8 months ago. It started in January. Throughout the summer and the beginning of autumn, my father had secret meetings with this woman. Business trips and extra hours, all accounted for. Grace, look at this, Sophie whispered, pointing to a message group. The messages were more explicit here. The conversation was about the future. Victoria was giving my father bad feelings. When are you going to tell him? She wrote, I'm tired of hiding it. You need to tell him so we can do it openly. My father's answers were cautious but firm. Soon, I'm looking for the right moment. I don't want to lose the girls, but this is no longer a comparison. I need to tell them, and I need to tell Margaret. Then, you and I can start over. Starting over. My father had planned to leave my mother, to leave Sophie and me, to break up our family. This wasn't just a relationship, it was an escape plan. Those 45 minutes spent waiting in the study felt like living every second of my life. But consciously, we hid the files again and left through the garden gate. Without trembling, in the room, Sophie and I cried loudly, not just wordless sobs, but terrible sobs. She collapsed on top of me, and I held her as if sharing this burden with you. Our trip to the park on Friday had come too early. This morning, I had wanted to stay up all night, but now I felt like a plant. The next morning, Monday, our parents were acting normally. My father was at breakfast. My mother smelled wonderful. All that perfect wonder had now turned into a feeling of being tainted. I asked Sophie if we should send the message. She nodded. He wrote a message and humiliated her. Simple but terrifying. Mom, you need to know this. On Friday, we saw Dad with another woman going in and out of a restaurant. He was walking with her, holding her hands. Then that night, I found his second phone and read his messages. He's been having a secret affair for 8 months. I'll send you a photo. My hand trembled before I sent the message. I looked at Sophie. Are you sure? I asked. He nodded. He pressed the send button. After Mom received the message, how quickly had we been called? 4 minutes. Girls, where are you? I'm coming home. She hesitated to reply. At school, please wait, I wrote. At lunchtime, we recited our prayers in the library. I spoke to the school secretary and told her that our mothers had picked us up. Our mothers arrived 30 minutes later, their faces red, their eyes wet. They pulled us close and hugged us tightly, the kind of hug you give to save a life. We got in the car and drove along the highway without speaking. I heard my mother. Her knowledge is in the field of culture. Yusuf is a lawyer, a divorce lawyer. He made this clear before speaking to my father. Girls, you will tell me everything, she said, her voice firm. From beginning to end, you will not hide anything. In that car, for 2 hours, I watched as my mother's world crumbled as she recounted the whole truth. Every word, every detail pierced her like a knife. When she heard that my father was planning to leave our family and live a different life, my mother's hands turned white on the steering wheel. How many years? She asked, her voice devoid of faith. All this time while telling me I love you every day. Was he doing these things with another woman? How many years? 8 months, I said. My mother shook her head, her eyes fixed on the road, but I see she's not there. She's in a bad place where the soul is broken. As the truth gradually emerges, the initial shock gives way to a profound silence. This silence brings with it a reassessment not only of what happened, but also of the past. As trust is shaken, people begin to realize their own limitations. This awareness is not easy, but it is inevitable. And at this point, the need to regain control of one's life arises. My grandmother's house, my mother wouldn't let us leave. We overheard conversations with the lawyer, the tearing up of documents, and difficult phone calls with my father. My father, faced with a divorce, had pulled Victoria back at least for now. But this recovery will never be complete. Something that's been broken can never be put back together. The following weeks, the divorce process began. Lawyers, paperwork, court dates. My mother tried to stay strong, but she didn't want to see herself crying. My grandmother was very upset from worry. My father, meanwhile, went through a period of intense stress. He tried to call us, sent messages, vows, and apologies, but it was too late. Far too late. A month later, I had agreed to see my father. My mother suggested it, wanting to protect his rights. But I wasn't ready. My request to go with her was refused. I felt so terrible about seeing him. My father waited in a caf. The moment he saw her face, he collapsed. He was crying, sobbing, apologizing in vain. "I love you and Sophie very much," he said, "but was I a bad man?" "Very bad." "Yes," I said, my voice cold. "You are." There are some words that once spoken by a person mark a point of no return. I pointed to that point and slammed the door shut. The months that followed were a mixture of healing and crying, of guilt. My mother went to therapy, and so did Sophie too. My mother slowly began to rediscover herself as a person, not just as a wife. She was acquitted, perhaps not perfectly, but she was acquitted. My father initiated the marriage process with Victoria. It was terrible to hear, but we had now become part of that reality. As girls, we attended his court-appointed meetings with restricted word exchange. Now, 2 years later, I'm 16. I've studied psychology and am still studying it because I wanted to become a channel for others to experience the trauma I went through. Sophie has shown strong growth, even finding a way to save herself in some way, thanks to her father, and isn't unhappy anymore. She found a man named Tom, a bookseller, someone who makes her laugh, someone who doesn't pretend. Some truths don't emerge all at once. They reveal themselves in fragments. People may choose not to piece these fragments together for a long time because the picture that emerges when they are put together has the power to shape the very foundations of life. Therefore, small signs are evaluated in isolation and the whole is overlooked. However, over time, these signs begin to complement each other. Unexplained gaps emerge behind daily decisions. The more questions are asked, the less clear the answers become. People want to see this uncertainty as temporary, but as the uncertainty persists, inner unease deepens. This unease reaches a point where it can no longer be ignored. Recovery, as no one ever tells you, isn't a straight line. It's not like a graph from a starting point to an ending point. Instead, it's up and down, back and forth, sometimes crashes, sometimes ups. Dr. Melissa taught me this when I was sitting in the therapist's office. At the time, it had been exactly 4 months since the divorce, and I was still taking medication to help me sleep. "Grace, I've noticed you lost your voice right after the divorce," said Dr. Melissa, looking at her notes. "Now, you seem to have found it again, but there are days when you're down. Is that normal?" "Yes," I said, resting my elbow on my knee. "I collapse when I see a picture of my father or when my mother is very quiet on a special day." The therapist nodded. "This is part of the trauma. There are triggers. We need to identify them and develop coping mechanisms." Coping mechanisms, that's what I needed most in life, because going to court-appointed visits with my father felt like a piece of yourself was being cut off. First, 2 hours a month, then 4 hours. Each visit was an attempt at face-to-face reconciliation. But in reality, it was a deeper wound. At our first meeting, my father took me and sat me down on a park bench. There were millions of words in the silence. He wore glasses as if he didn't want to see me. But then he lifted his eyes and looked, and I felt a kind of loss in his eye. It was as if he had lost me twice. First, through his betrayal, and then by destroying our relationship. "Grace," he began, but couldn't be finished. He started to cry. As a man, I had never seen him cry like that. It almost surprised me. I almost considered forgiving him. But then I remembered those messages, the loving words he sent to Victoria, that he had been living another life for years. Every lie he told me. "What is the reason for this?" I asked, my voice as hard as steel. "Why did you do this?" "I don't know," he said, as if he really didn't know. "I wanted to be able to talk to you, but I wanted to experience the things I couldn't do with you. My relationship with your mother, it had stopped. There was no love left. Or so I thought. Have you considered talking to your mother then?" I asked. "Or getting a divorce if you're so unhappy?" He didn't answer because the answer was simple no. He hadn't thought about it. Instead, he chose to live a secret life to deceive us. The subsequent conversations were almost identical. My father tried to defend himself, making excuses. Victoria was a woman who needed to meet you, he said. He told me this nonsense as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He doesn't want to meet me, I said plainly. I don't want to meet him because he destroyed our family. I destroyed the family, my father said in a heavy voice. Victoria was just the reason. Not the reason, but reasons. The choice of words, even in the slightest way, still seemed to diminish his responsibility, as if some other force were pushing him. At home, my mother, yes, seemed strong. But in the night, I heard crying coming from her bed. The walls were thin, sound could see through. I ran into the room and hugged her. I'm sorry, Grace, she said, as if it were my fault. I'm sorry I put you and Sophie through this. This isn't your fault, I said sharply. This is his fault. But inside, I had very mixed feelings. I hadn't wanted to defend my father, but there was a part of me that wanted to forgive him because he is still my father. And children want to love both sides, even if it's unpleasant. Sophie, more or less, changed. She didn't want to go to school. She went to a therapist. Doctors gave her medication for anxiety. My situation was a bit more controlled, but mine because I had learned being a child in the middle of a divorce meant being observant and also being an actor. 9 months later, the court decision was finally made. My mother obtained maternal custody. My father had the right to visit every Monday and Thursday. That is, one weekend every other week. When the documents were thrown in the trash, I felt that this was a legal sign. But no legal decision could ever determine love, affection, or trust. After 9 months, my father started calling me again. He wasn't asking about Victoria, just about me, how I was feeling, how school was going, what I was doing. This gave me a little peace of mind. Maybe, I thought to myself, maybe he was trying to be a little better person. Then, unexpectedly, my father called me. Grace, Victoria and I are getting married. I wanted to introduce you this weekend. Just hearing the words she said felt like hitting my head against the wall. She's getting married. I didn't want to see Victoria's ring on her finger, probably using the diamonds from my mother's ring. I don't know, I said, my voice weak. I need to think about it. I discussed this with the therapist. Dr. Melissa asked me, do you not want to meet him, or are you worried about whether you should or shouldn't? Both, I said frankly, but at the same time, I'm curious. I wonder who this woman is who made my father happy and destroyed my family. Finally, I had accepted it. A cafe, a neutral place, my father, Victoria, and me. It was the first time I'd seen Victoria up close. She was beautiful, of course, but there was something else, a burden, perhaps. It was as if she had to prove herself, but couldn't because by definition, it had all started with deceiving those I loved. Grace, I'm so glad to meet you, he said, extending his hand. I squeezed his hand, not hard, but not too soft either. There was distance between us, a wall, and that wall was very thick. That cafe and I said, and it was very difficult. I want to say that I think my father is wonderful, a very good father. But as a daughter, I can't forget that his relationship with you changed my family. Heard it? This isn't personal, but it's true. Victoria remained silent. My father wanted to say something, but he choked up. And after a few seconds, Victoria nodded and said, you're right, and I'm very sorry. It sounded like a genuine apology, but it had already been done, you know. It wasn't harsh on the roof, but he got it. The decisions made, the sacrifices given, and the years shared are reevaluated. This process is tiring, but also educational. One learns to separate one's own responsibilities from those beyond one's control. And this separation forms the basis for living the rest of life more consciously. With my father, we're less painful. Sophie started to come out of therapy. My mother became serious with Tom. We slowly began to adjust to a new normal. It's not normal, but will be normal. 2 years later, I was 16. My father and Victoria had a child, a boy, Ethan. Hearing this was a strange mix of emotions. My father had given Victoria a child, something that could never change what he had given us. But it had opened another chapter, another life. And I sometimes wondered with this child, when he grew up, ever learn who my father really was. When I went to visit my father, I saw Ethan, tiny with blonde hair. He looked so much like my father. And paradoxically, I loved him because he's innocent. He doesn't lie. He's just a child. He hugs my father, listens to my father lovingly say his name. And I don't know what I felt inside. Maybe a little happiness, a little pain, a little balance. In therapy, Dr. Melissa asked me, "Have you forgiven your father?" I don't know. I said honestly, I've forgiven, but I haven't. I'm living, but I'm not. Sometimes when I remember the good memories, I collapse because I know they're lies. But sometimes I feel like I need a father at my age. And he's there, and he is my father. This is normal, said Dr. Melissa. Trauma is complicated and complex. Life isn't black or white. It's shades of gray. Shades of gray instead of black and white. Yes, that's right. I was graduating from high school. Almost 18, my father sat at the graduation ceremony, his eyes welling up as he looked at my dress. Victoria sat beside him, Ethan asleep. Tom was next to Anne, laughing. Two lives in the same room at the same ceremony, but never to touch. In my apology speech, I didn't mention my father, but I said something else. In my life, I've learned to endure difficult times. That silence isn't complicity with evil, but silence carries a weight. Telling the truth was difficult, but it was right. And I will always try to choose what is right, no matter how painful it may be. My father cried while listening. Maybe it meant I had started something. Maybe it didn't. It doesn't matter anymore. I went to university to study psychology. My sister Sophie also went to study human resources. My mother went back to photography and is quite happy. Tom is a good guy, and if he leaves, at least he leaves when it's clear. Say it. My father and I now have coffee together once a week. It's not a complete relationship, but it's a relationship nonetheless. Talking is still difficult at times, but possible. I love Ethan because he's innocent. I don't know if he loves my father. Have I forgiven him? Partially. Even though I'm still alive, yes. Sophie once asked me, "Do you regret telling Mom?" I thought about it a lot. No, I said, she's not sorry. Because if we hadn't told her, Mom would have died surrounded by lies. She might not have recovered. And we would have lived watching her. Silence would have done more harm. Sophie nodded. I think so too. It's just that sometimes I want to ask. If we didn't have children, maybe it wouldn't be known. Maybe I said, but the awareness came and our lives changed. But it got better for my mother, for us. To get better after being bad, that's healing. I am now 21 years old and finishing my studies in psychology. I am doing clinical practice, working with traumatized people, especially those with family trauma, because I know what it's like. I know what they must be feeling. After my father's betrayal, we as girls stood our ground. My mother, Thailand, therapists, friends. But the weight remains forever. Some nights, I still dream that moment at the restaurant, the moment I saw my father with Victoria. I wake up and my heart is racing. But then I remember that night is over. We may do. Our lives go on. I tell people about my family. It's a broken family. But things worked out. My father and mother separated. But that separation wasn't just physical. It saved my mother. It means giving her another life. It means teaching us a lesson about the value of honesty. The devil is in the details, but some details can save lives. Where is the recovery at this point? It's still progressing. Perhaps we'll never fully recover, but every degree of recovery is a great victory. Some stories are understood not when they are told, but after they are heard. The weight of experiences changes shape over time, and details that are painful at first later transform into a meaningful whole. People cannot immediately grasp why things are the way they are. Often, answers come not in haste, but in silence. The most difficult part of this process is not making peace with the past, but accepting the past as it is. What happened cannot be undone, but the meaning given to it can be changed. One learns to move forward by understanding without blaming or judging oneself. This learning process is not quick. It requires patience, time, and sometimes solitude. The harshest lessons life teaches are often the quietest. No one shouts. No one seems to warn. Truths creep into everyday life, hidden away. And when they are discovered, they trigger a profound transformation within a person's inner world. This story shows that even when control seems completely lost, a person can create a space for themselves. Even when everything feels out of hand, the power to make decisions is still within. Sometimes this power begins with a small step, asking a question, looking at a document, not postponing a conversation. Small steps can prevent major breakdowns. What's important here is is not denying the past, but learning from it. What happened is not a source of shame. On the contrary, being able to take responsibility the moment it is recognized is a sign of great awareness. One doesn't have to know everything beforehand, but one doesn't have to ignore it after learning about it either. This story also reminds us that we are not alone. Many people experience similar situations, and most carry them in silence. Sharing lightens the burden. Talking about what has happened brings it into a more manageable state. Life is sometimes not rebuilt, but rearranged. The same pieces are put together in a different way. This new arrangement may be more conscious, more balanced, and more solid than the old one. A person is defined not by what happens to them, but by what they do with it. What remains at the end of this story is not a list of losses, but a gained perspective. This perspective makes every step taken in the future more cautious, but also stronger. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that we can have control over our own lives. Some stories don't have happy endings, but some leave you on a stronger footing. That in itself is a form of healing.